The year was 2189, and humanity had grown tired of waiting. For almost 60 years, every ship that tried to leave the edge of the Sol system was turned back. Not destroyed, not boarded, just turned back, gently but firmly, by a wall of light that no scientist could explain. The wall had a name now. People called it the Barrier. It sat just past the orbit of Neptune, invisible until a ship got close, and then it shimmered into view like a curtain made of stars. No weapon could break it. No signal could pass through it. Every probe, every drone, every manned ship that touched it was pushed back with a force so gentle it felt almost polite, and yet so strong that no engine ever built could fight against it. At first, humans thought it was a natural phenomenon. Scientists spent years studying it, running tests, sending sensors, trying to find a pattern. But then, in 2151, a Chinese survey ship called the Yellow River touched the barrier and received a message. It was short, it was clear, and it changed everything. Turn back. You are not ready. No one knew who sent it, no one knew why. But after that message, the world stopped arguing about whether the barrier was natural. It was not. Someone had built it, someone was watching, and someone had decided that humanity did not deserve to leave its own solar system. For the next several decades, the nations of Earth tried everything. They sent diplomats in the form of coded messages, hoping for a reply. They sent scientists to study the barrier's edges, hoping to find a weak point. They sent warships, hoping that a show of strength might convince whoever was out there that humans were not to be trifled with. Nothing worked. The barrier held. The message never changed. Turn back. You are not ready. By the year 2170, most people on Earth had given up hope of ever leaving the solar system. Colonies grew on Mars, on the moons of Jupiter, on space stations scattered across the asteroid belt. Humanity filled every corner of its own system, mining, farming, building cities in the dark. But beyond the barrier, the stars stayed out of reach. Every telescope could see them. No ship could touch them. It was around this time that a young engineer named Mara Voss began to ask a different question. Instead of asking how to break the barrier, she asked a simpler one. What was on the other side of it, and who was strong enough to keep the entire human race locked in one system? Mara Voss was born on Mars, in the underground city of New Shanghai, in the year 2151, the very same year the barrier first spoke. Her mother was a physicist, who had spent half her life studying the strange energy readings near Neptune. Her father was a pilot, who had once tried, and failed, to push a ship through the barrier by brute force alone. He came home from that mission with burns across half his body, and a haunted look in his eyes that never fully went away. Growing up, Mara heard the story of the barrier so many times that it became part of her own memory, even though she had not been there. She grew up angry, not at her parents, and not even really at the barrier itself, but at the idea that humanity had simply accepted defeat. She grew up believing that somewhere, someone had to be brave enough, or foolish enough, to try again, with a plan that made sense. She joined the United Earth Fleet at 18. By 25, she had become one of the youngest ship captains in fleet history, known for her sharp mind and her refusal to follow orders she thought were foolish. She was not popular with the higher-ups. She asked too many questions. She pushed too hard. But she was good. Good enough that they kept promoting her anyway, hoping that her talent would outweigh her stubbornness. By 2185, Mara had reached the rank of fleet captain, and she had spent years quietly building a case for something the United Earth government had banned for over a decade, a new attempt to break through the barrier, using technology no one on Earth had ever tried before. The technology came from an unlikely place, an old research station on Europa, where a small team of engineers had spent 15 years studying the wreck of an alien probe. The probe had drifted into the solar system in 2160, damaged and drifting, and by the time it was found, most of its systems were dead. But its power core was not. That power core ran on a kind of energy no human scientist fully understood, something the engineers called phase drive, because it seemed to bend the space around a ship rather than push through it. For years, the government had refused to let anyone build a ship using the alien power core. They were afraid of what it might mean to use enemy technology, afraid of what might happen if the barrier reacted badly, afraid, most of all, of another failed attempt, another list of names to mourn. But by 2187, things had changed. Food shortages on Mars had grown worse. The asteroid belt colonies were fighting over resources. Earth's own population had grown so large that entire regions faced water rationing. Humanity needed room to grow, and everyone knew where that room was. Out there, past the barrier, in a galaxy full of empty worlds. The pressure to try again became too strong to ignore. Mara Voss saw her chance and took it. She spent 8 months building a proposal, gathering allies in the government, calling in favors from old friends in the fleet. She argued that if the barrier truly meant to stop humanity forever, it would have destroyed every ship that touched it, instead of gently turning them back. She argued that the barrier's builders were not trying to punish humanity, but to test it, and she argued that if humans wanted to pass that test, they needed a ship strong enough and smart enough to prove they were ready. The government agreed, but only partly. They gave her a ship. They gave her a crew, but they did not give her much time, and they did not give her much support. If she failed, there would be no rescue. No one would come looking. The mission was classified as high risk, and everyone involved knew that high risk was a polite way of saying, you are probably going to die. The ship was called the ISS Reckoning. It was small compared to most fleet warships, built for speed rather than size, with a hull made of a new composite material that could take a beating and keep flying. At its heart sat the alien power core, wired into a phase drive system that no other ship in the fleet possessed. The engineers who built it were proud of their work, but they were also honest about its dangers. The phase drive was unstable. It had never been tested at full power. If it failed during a jump, the ship and everyone on it might be torn apart, or worse, scattered across space and time in ways no one could predict. That was why people started calling the Reckoning the dangerous warship, not because of its weapons, though it carried plenty, but because of what sat in its core, a piece of alien technology that could either save humanity or destroy the very ship carrying its last, best hope. Mara chose her crew carefully. She wanted people who were skilled, yes, but more than that, she wanted people who believed in the mission the way she did. She wanted people who were tired of watching humanity stay trapped in its own backyard, while an entire galaxy waited beyond a wall of light. Her first choice was Ren Okafor, a systems engineer who had helped design the phase drive itself. Ren was quiet, careful, and brilliant, the kind of person who checked every wire twice before trusting it. He had grown up in Lagos before moving to the Europa station as a teenager, and he had spent more of his life studying the alien probe than he had spent doing almost anything else. If anyone understood the phase drive, it was him. Her second choice was Talia Reyes, a combat pilot with a reputation for flying ships in ways that should not have been possible. Talia had grown up in the belt, among miners and smugglers, and she flew the way she talked. Fast, sharp, and without much patience for rules that got in her way. She had lost her older brother during one of the earlier failed barrier attempts, and she had never quite let go of the anger that came with that loss. Her third choice was Dr. Amara Chen, a xenobiologist who had spent her career preparing for a first contact that never came. Amara believed, more than anyone else on the crew, that whoever built the barrier was not simply an enemy. She believed there was a reason behind the wall, a logic that humans had not yet understood, and she wanted to be there when that reason was finally revealed. Rounding out the crew was Jonah Whitfield, an older weapons officer who had served on 3 different fleet ships before joining the Reckoning. Jonah did not care much about the mystery of the barrier or the philosophy of first contact. He cared about keeping his crewmates alive, and he brought with him decades of combat experience that the younger crew members lacked. Together, these 5 people spent 6 months preparing the Reckoning for its mission. They ran simulations. They studied every scrap of data ever gathered about the barrier. They argued, late into the night, about what might be waiting on the other side, and whether the ship's weapons would even matter against a force capable of stopping every human vessel for 60 years. On the morning of the launch, the crew stood together on the observation deck of the Europa station, looking out at their ship through a wide window. The Reckoning floated in the dark, its hull catching the pale light of Jupiter in the distance, its systems humming with power that no human hands had ever fully controlled. "Are we ready?" Talia asked, breaking the silence. Mara looked at each of her crewmates in turn. Ren, checking a tablet full of last-minute calculations. Amara, staring out at the ship with quiet hope in her eyes. Jonah, arms crossed, jaw set, the same way he always looked before a mission. And Talia, waiting for an answer she probably already knew. "No," Mara said finally. "We're not ready. Nobody could be ready for this, but we're going anyway." No one argued with that. It was the truest thing anyone had said in months. They boarded the ship an hour later. The engines came to life with a low hum that shook the deck plates beneath their boots. Ren ran his final systems check, his hands steady despite the tension in his voice. Amara sat quietly at her station, going over notes she had already memorized 100 times. Jonah checked the weapon systems twice, then a third time, muttering under his breath about redundancy. Talia gripped the controls, her knuckles pale, her eyes fixed on the black of space ahead. Mara sat in the captain's chair and gave the order that would either make history or end it. "Take us out." The Reckoning pulled away from the Europa station and began its long journey toward the edge of the solar system, toward the place where every human ship before it had failed, toward the wall of light that had kept humanity caged for almost 60 years. Behind them, Earth and Mars and the Belt watched and waited, most of them unaware that anything unusual was happening at all. The mission was secret. If it failed, the world would never know. If it succeeded, the world would never be the same. Ahead of them lay Neptune, and beyond Neptune, the barrier. And beyond the barrier, waiting in the dark, were the ones who had decided, 60 years ago, that humanity was not yet ready to join the stars. The Reckoning was about to test that decision, with a ship built from stolen technology, a crew that believed in something worth dying for, and a captain who refused to accept no as a final answer. As the ship gathered speed, Mara Voss stared out at the growing dark ahead of her and whispered a promise to herself, one she intended to keep no matter what waited on the other side. "This time, we're not turning back." The journey from Europa to the edge of the solar system took 11 days. For most of that time, the crew of the Reckoning had little to do but wait, check their systems, and try not to think too hard about what waited for them at the end of the trip. Mara Voss used the time to study everything the fleet had ever recorded about the barrier. She had read the files 100 times before, but she read them again anyway, searching for some small detail she might have missed. Every failed attempt, every strange energy reading, every version of the same short message, "Turn back, you are not ready." She noticed something on the fourth day that she had never noticed before. In every single recorded contact with the barrier, the message came at a slightly different time after the ship touched the light. Some ships were turned back in seconds. Others lingered for almost a full minute before the barrier responded. She brought this to Ren, who frowned over the numbers for almost an hour before speaking. "It's not random," Ren said. "Look here. The bigger the ship, the longer the delay. The Yellow River was a survey ship, small and slow, and it got its answer in 8 seconds. The Hammerstrike, that old fleet cruiser they sent in 2172, took almost 50 seconds. So the barrier is thinking," Mara said. "It's deciding something, not just reacting." "Maybe," Ren said. "Or maybe it's scanning, trying to figure out if the ship is a threat before it responds." Amara, who had been listening quietly from her station, spoke up. "If that's true, then the message isn't really turn back. It's more like, we've judged you, and you failed." The thought settled over the room like a weight. If the barrier was judging every ship that approached it, then the Reckoning, with its stolen alien power core and its untested phase drive, might be judged more harshly than any ship before it. "Then we'd better make sure it judges us well," Jonah said from his corner of the bridge, not looking up from the weapons console he had been fussing over for the better part of an hour. Talia laughed, though there was no real humor in it. "How do you impress a wall of light that's kept us out for 60 years? "We don't try to impress it," Mara said. "We show it we're not going anywhere. That's different." On the 7th day, the crew ran their first full test of the phase drive, though only at a fraction of its power. Ren had insisted on this for weeks, arguing that jumping straight into the barrier with an unstable drive that had never once been fired was close to suicide. Mara agreed, reluctantly. knowing it would cost them time they did not have much of. The test took place in open space, far from any planet or station, in case something went wrong. Ren counted down from 10, his voice steady, despite the sweat on his brow. At 0, the drive activated, and for half a second, the entire ship seemed to fold in on itself, the stars outside the viewport bending and twisting into strange shapes before snapping back into place. When it was over, alarms blared across the bridge. Ren dove for his console, fingers flying across the controls, cutting off warning after warning as the ship's systems screamed about power surges and structural stress. "Report," Mara snapped. "We're okay," Ren said after a tense few seconds, though his voice shook slightly. "Hull integrity held, power core is stable, but that surge, if we'd run it at full strength, I don't know if the ship would have survived. So we can't use it at full power," Talia said. "We might have to," Ren replied grimly. "The only reason we made it through the test at partial power is because I built in extra safety limits. Those limits will slow the drive down. If we need speed to punch through the barrier before it can react, we may need to strip those limits away." Mara looked around the bridge at her crew. Everyone understood the trade-off without needing it explained further. A safer drive meant a slower ship, more time for the barrier to study them and turn them back like every ship before. A faster drive meant more danger, more risk that the reckoning would tear itself apart before it ever got close. "We'll decide when we get there," Mara said finally. "Ren, keep working on it. See if there's a middle ground." Ren nodded and got back to work, his console glowing late into the ship's artificial night cycle, as he searched for a way to make the impossible drive just a little less deadly. While Ren worked on the engines, Amara spent her time studying the barrier's energy signature, trying to understand not how to break it, but why it existed at all. She had a theory, one she had been quietly developing for years, long before she ever joined the Reckoning's crew. She shared it with Mara on the 9th day, as the two of them sat together in the small mess hall, sharing a meal of reconstituted rice and vegetables that tasted like cardboard no matter how the ship's cook tried to season it. "I don't think the barrier is meant to keep us in forever," Amara said. "I think it's a test, like we talked about before. But I think it's more specific than that. I think whoever built it is worried about something humanity might become, not something we already are." "What do you mean?" Mara asked. "Think about it," Amara said, leaning forward. "The message never says you are dangerous or you are unwanted. It says, you are not ready. Ready for what? If they just wanted to keep us contained, they could have said so. Instead, they're waiting for some kind of change, some kind of growth." "Growth into what?" Amara shook her head. "I don't know, but I think it matters that we're the ones trying to break through now, using their own technology against them, in a way. Maybe that's the test. Maybe they want to see if we can handle power we don't fully understand, without destroying ourselves with it." Mara thought about that for a long moment, staring down at her half-eaten meal. "That's a nice theory," she said finally. "But it doesn't change what we have to do. Whether it's a test or a trap, we're still the ones who have to walk into it." "I know," Amara said quietly. "I just want us to walk in with our eyes open." By the 10th day, the Reckoning had reached the outer edge of the solar system, past the orbit of Neptune, close enough now that the crew could see the faint shimmer of the barrier on their long-range sensors, a curtain of light stretching farther than any of them could see the end of. Ren had managed to find a partial solution to the power problem, a way to run the drive at nearly 70% strength without risking a full structural failure. It was not perfect. It was not the full power the ship was capable of. But it was enough, he hoped, to get them through the barrier faster than any ship before them. Jonah spent the final day running weapons drills with Talia, even though everyone knew that whatever waited beyond the barrier would likely be far beyond anything the Reckoning guns could handle. Still, old habits died hard, and Jonah wanted his crew ready for anything, even a fight they probably could not win. On the 11th day, the Reckoning slowed to a stop just outside the visible edge of the barrier. The crew gathered on the bridge, all 5 of them present at their stations, the low hum of the ship's engines the only sound besides their own breathing. Mara stood at the front of the bridge, looking out at the shimmering wall of light that filled the entire viewport ahead of them. It looked almost beautiful up close, like something out of a dream, colors shifting and swirling in patterns too complex to follow. "This is it," she said. "Once we cross that line, there's no turning back." "Not really. If the drive fails, we might not even make it through in one piece. If it works, we don't know what's waiting on the other side." She turned to look at her crew. Ren, hands hovering over the controls that would activate the phase drive. Amara, watching the shimmering light with the same quiet hope she always carried. Jonah, steady and grim, ready for whatever came next. Talia, gripping the flight controls, her jaw tight with determination. "Anyone want to back out now?" Mara asked. "Last chance." No one spoke. No one moved. It was answer enough. Mara turned back to face the viewport, drawing in a slow breath. Somewhere out there, past the shimmering wall of light, an entire galaxy waited, full of worlds humanity had never touched, watched over by someone who had judged humanity unworthy for 60 long years.
"Ren,"
Mara said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Bring the drive online." "Drive online," Ren confirmed, his fingers moving across the console. Lights flickered across the bridge, as the alien power core deep in the ship's belly began to hum with growing energy, the sound rising from a low murmur to a steady, powerful thrum that the crew could feel in their bones. "Talia," Mara said, "take us in." "Taking us in," Talia repeated, easing the ship forward, toward the wall of light that had turned back every human vessel for 6 long decades. The reckoning moved closer, and closer still, until the shimmering curtain filled the entire viewport, close enough now that it seemed to glow with its own strange, cold light. The ship's sensors began to chirp with warnings, the same warnings every ship before them had likely received in their final moments, before being turned away. "Contact in 5 seconds, Ren called out, watching the numbers climb on his console. 4, 3. Mara gripped the arms of her captain's chair, watching the wall of light grow closer, waiting for the moment that would decide everything. 2, 1. The reckoning touched the barrier, and the entire ship lit up with a blinding white light that swallowed the bridge whole. The white light lasted only a few seconds, but to Mara Voss, it felt like an eternity. She could hear alarms screaming across the bridge, could feel the ship shaking beneath her, could sense the pressure building in her own skull, as if the light itself were pressing down on her thoughts. Then, as quickly as it began, the light vanished, and the reckoning shuddered violently, throwing every crew member against their restraints. Mara's vision cleared just in time to see the viewport fill with stars, unfamiliar stars, scattered in patterns she had never seen before. "Report!" she shouted, her voice hoarse. "Hull integrity at 82%, Ren called out, his hands flying across his console. "Power core is stable, but barely. We took a hit from something during the crossing, some kind of energy pulse. I don't think it was trying to destroy us. I think it was trying to stop us, the same way it stopped every other ship." "But it didn't stop us," Talia said, a note of disbelief creeping into her voice. She stared at the readouts in front of her, checking them twice before speaking again. "We're through. We're actually through the barrier." For a moment, no one on the bridge said anything at all. 60 years of failure, 60 years of turned-back ships and lost hope, and now, for the first time, a human vessel had crossed the line that no one else had ever crossed. "Position?" Mara asked, forcing herself to focus, despite the disbelief buzzing through her own mind. "Working on it," Ren said, cross-referencing star charts against what little data they had. After a tense minute, he looked up, his face pale. "Captain, based on the star patterns, I think we're still in the same general region of space, just past where the barrier used to sit. But there's something else." "What?" "We're not alone." On the main viewport, a shape began to emerge from the darkness ahead of them. First one, then several more, until an entire formation of alien ships came into view, arranged in a wide arc that stretched for what looked like thousands of kilometers. The ships were unlike anything human eyes had ever seen, long and curved, made of some dark material that seemed to drink in the starlight around it rather than reflect it. "That's a lot of ships," Jonah muttered, already running calculations on the weapons console, though the tightness in his jaw made it clear he already knew the reckoning stood little chance in an open fight against a fleet that size. "They're not moving," Talia said, watching the sensors carefully. "No weapons charging, no maneuvering. They're just sitting there. Watching us," Amara said quietly. "The same way they've probably watched every ship that ever touched the barrier." Mara stood from her chair and walked closer to the viewport, staring out at the alien formation. Despite the fear coiling in her stomach, she felt something else too. A fierce, burning curiosity that had driven her whole life toward this exact moment. "Hail them," she said. "Captain, we don't even know if they can understand us," Ren said. "Then we'll find another way to make them understand," Mara replied. "Open a channel. All frequencies we have." Ren worked quickly, opening every communication channel the reckoning possessed, broadcasting a simple greeting in every human language the ship's computer had on file, along with a set of basic mathematical signals that any species advanced enough to build the barrier would likely understand. For a long, tense minute, there was no response. The alien fleet remained still, silent, watching. Then, without warning, one of the massive ships broke away from the formation and began to move toward the reckoning. Slow and deliberate, its dark hull catching strange flickers of light as it approached. "Talia, get ready to move if we need to," Mara said quietly. "Already on it," Talia replied, her hands hovering over the flight controls. The alien ship closed the distance in a matter of minutes, growing larger and larger in the viewport until it dwarfed the reckoning. Entirely, easily 10 times its size. Then, just as it seemed close enough to touch, it stopped, hanging motionless in space before them. A new signal came through on the reckoning. Communication systems, not words, but a series of tones and pulses that Ren scrambled to decode. It took several minutes, the whole bridge holding its breath, before a translation finally appeared on the main screen. "You have crossed the threshold. State your purpose." Mara felt a chill run down her spine. This was it. The first real communication humanity had ever received from whoever had built the barrier. She glanced at Amara, who gave a small, encouraging nod, and then Mara stepped forward, speaking clearly, knowing her words would be translated and heard by whatever intelligence waited on the other end. "We are humans, from the system you call the Threshold's Edge. Our people have been kept from the stars for 60 years by your barrier. We came to ask why, and to prove that we are ready to stand among you." There was a long pause before the response came through. "You crossed using power that is not your own. This does not prove readiness. It proves danger." "Then let us prove otherwise," Mara said. "Give us the chance to speak with your leaders. Let us explain ourselves." Another pause, longer this time. The bridge crew waited in tense silence, every eye fixed on the massive alien ship hanging before them. "Your kind has been judged before. The judgment remains unchanged. You are not ready." "Judged by who?" Mara demanded, frustration creeping into her voice despite her attempts to stay calm. "Based on what? We've never even met you. How can you judge an entire species you've never spoken to?" "We have watched you for a very long time, small ones. Longer than you understand. Your judgment was not made lightly." Amara stepped forward then, standing beside Mara, her voice steady, despite the tension in the room. "If you've watched us, then you know we've grown. You know we've changed since the first time you judged us. Doesn't that count for something?" There was no immediate response. The massive alien ship remained silent for almost a full minute, and Mara began to wonder if the conversation was over, if they were about to be turned away just like every ship before them, or worse, destroyed for daring to cross the line at all. Finally, a new message appeared. "You will be brought before the assembly. Your fate will be decided there. Do not resist." Before anyone on the bridge could respond, a beam of pale light shot out from the alien ship, wrapping around the reckoning. Like an invisible hand, the human ship's engines sputtered and died, its controls going dark despite Talia's frantic attempts to regain control. "They've got us," Talia said, her voice tight with alarm. Engines are offline. We're being pulled somewhere. Where? Mara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. I don't know, Ren said, watching helplessly, as his console flickered with readings he could not fully interpret. But wherever it is, we're not the ones flying anymore. The Reckoning began to move, pulled along by the massive alien ship, deeper into the unknown region of space beyond the barrier. Around them, the rest of the alien formation began to move as well, falling into position around the small human vessel like a funeral procession, or perhaps an honor guard, though Mara found it hard to tell the difference in that moment. Jonah stood at his station, hands still resting on the weapons console out of habit, though he knew as well as anyone that firing on their captors now would likely mean instant destruction. Orders, Captain? Mara took a deep breath, forcing herself to think clearly, despite the fear tightening in her chest. They had made it through the barrier. They had done what no human ship had ever done before. But now, instead of freedom, they were being led somewhere unknown, at the mercy of a power far greater than their own. We wait, she said finally. We wait, and we watch, and we look for any chance to make our case. This is what we came for, isn't it? A chance to speak, to prove ourselves. We're getting that chance now, even if it's not exactly how we planned it. And if they decide against us? Talia asked quietly. Mara looked out at the shifting stars beyond the viewport, at the massive alien ships surrounding them on every side, carrying them toward a fate none of them could predict. Then we make sure they understand exactly who they're judging, she said. We didn't come this far to go down without a fight, one way or another. The journey lasted almost 6 hours. The crew spent the time preparing themselves as best they could, gathering every scrap of data their sensors could still collect despite their captured engines, trying to learn everything possible about the beings who held their fate in their hands. Amara spent the time studying the alien ships around them, noting details about their construction, their formation, the strange patterns of light that seemed to pulse along their hulls like some kind of communication, or perhaps even a form of breathing. She began to form theories about the species behind the barrier, though she kept most of them to herself, unwilling to speak too confidently about something so unknown. Ren worked quietly to restore whatever systems he could, managing to bring partial power back to some of the ship's sensors and internal systems, though the engines remained stubbornly dark, still held in the grip of whatever force had disabled them. Jonah and Talia spent the time in quiet conversation near the weapons console, planning contingencies for scenarios they both knew were unlikely to matter if the aliens truly wanted them destroyed, but that gave them both something to focus on besides the growing dread in the pit of their stomachs. And Mara stood at the front of the bridge, watching the stars shift slowly outside the viewport, thinking about her father, about the burns he had carried for the rest of his life, after his own failed attempt to break through the barrier, about all the ships and crews who had tried before her and failed. She thought about what it would mean if the Reckoning succeeded where all of them had not, and what it would mean if it failed instead, becoming just one more name on a long list of humanity's disappointments. Finally, after 6 long hours, the alien formation slowed, and a new shape came into view on the main viewport, larger than anything the crew of the Reckoning had ever seen, a structure so massive it defied easy description, part station, part fleet, part something else entirely, glowing with soft light against the backdrop of a nearby star. That must be it, Amara said softly. The assembly. Mara stared at the massive structure ahead of them, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her shoulders. Whatever waited inside would decide not just the fate of her small crew, but perhaps the fate of all humanity, still trapped on the other side of a barrier that had held for 60 long years. Get ready, she said quietly to her crew. This is the moment we came for. The Reckoning was pulled slowly toward the massive structure, toward whatever judgment awaited them inside, carrying with it the hopes of an entire species that had finally, after 60 years, found a way to knock on the door of the stars. The massive structure swallowed the Reckoning. Slowly, drawing it through what looked like a wide opening in its outer hull, into a vast internal space, lit by soft, shifting colors that reminded Mara of an aurora she had once seen from Earth's northern regions as a child. The alien escort ships peeled away one by one, as the human vessel was pulled deeper inside, until only the massive structure itself remained around them, its inner walls stretching so far in every direction that they seemed to disappear into a haze of colored light. "Sensors are picking up life signs," Ren said, his voice hushed with a mixture of fear and wonder. "Thousands of them. Maybe more. This place is enormous, Captain. I don't think it's a ship. I think it's a station. Or maybe even a small artificial world. Can you tell what species built it?" Mara asked. "Not exactly," Ren said, shaking his head. "But whatever it is, it's old. Some of these structural patterns look like they've been added onto for centuries, maybe longer. This place wasn't built all at once. It's grown, layer by layer, over a very long time. The reckoning came to a gentle stop inside a wide docking bay, surrounded on all sides by strange equipment and structures that none of the crew could fully identify. The beam of light that had carried them here faded, and slowly, the ship's own systems flickered back to life, though Ren was quick to note that several of their weapon systems remained locked, unable to power up no matter what he tried. "They're letting us move, but not letting us fight," Jonah observed grimly. "Smart, cautious, not exactly a warm welcome." A new message appeared on the main screen, translated by the ship's systems into simple, clear words. "5 of you may disembark, no weapons. You will be escorted to the assembly chamber." Mara looked at her crew. Every one of them understood the risk of what came next, and every one of them, without hesitation, moved to prepare for it anyway. They gathered at the ship's airlock a few minutes later, dressed in simple uniforms, unarmed as instructed, though Mara noticed Jonah slipping a small multi-tool into his boot out of habit, the kind of thing that would never count as a real weapon, but might still prove useful in a pinch. She said nothing about it. The airlock hissed open, revealing a wide corridor beyond, its walls glowing faintly with the same shifting colors they had seen throughout the massive structure. Waiting for them was a single alien figure, tall and thin, its body covered in what looked like overlapping plates of pale, silvery material, its face marked by 2 large dark eyes that seemed to study the humans with an intensity that made Mara's skin prickle. "I am Vethrix," the alien said, its voice coming through some kind of translation device that hung around its long neck, the words oddly smooth, despite the strangeness of the creature speaking them. "I will guide you to the assembly. Please, follow." The crew exchanged glances before falling into step behind Vethrix, walking through corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, past strange machinery and occasional glimpses of other alien beings, each one different from the last. Some tall and thin like their guide, others short and broad, still others so unfamiliar in shape that Amara found herself staring despite her best efforts at professional composure. "There are so many different species here," Amara whispered to Mara as they walked. "This isn't just one civilization. It's some kind of alliance." "The assembly," Mara murmured back, remembering the word from their earlier communication. "Maybe that's exactly what it is. A gathering of different species, all working together." Vethrix, walking just ahead of them, seemed to hear the murmured conversation despite its quiet tone. "The assembly represents 17 member species," it said without turning around. "We have kept peace across this region of the galaxy for over 4,000 of your years. The barrier you call it exists to protect that peace." "Protect it from what?" Mara asked. Vethrix paused then, turning to look back at the small group of humans following it. Its dark eyes seemed to hold something like sorrow, though Mara could not be certain she was reading the alien's expression correctly. "From species who grow too quickly, and too carelessly," Vethrix said. "We have seen it before. A young species discovers power beyond its understanding, and uses that power before it has learned wisdom to match it. The result, every time, has been destruction, sometimes of themselves, sometimes of others around them." "And you think that's us," Talia said, unable to keep the edge out of her voice. "You think we're just going to destroy ourselves, or everyone else, the moment we get the chance?" "We do not know what you will become," Vethrix said simply. "That is precisely why the barrier exists, to give species like yours the time to grow into your power slowly, under observation, before you are permitted to move freely among the stars." 60 years, Mara said. 60 years of watching us from behind that wall, and you never once tried to actually talk to us. never tried to teach us, or guide us, or explain any of this. You just watched, and judged, and turned us away. Vethrix was quiet for a moment before responding. Contact carries its own risks. A species not yet ready may be harmed by knowledge or technology offered too soon. We have made this mistake before, with tragic results. The barrier is meant to protect you as much as it protects us. The group continued walking in silence after that, each human lost in their own thoughts about what they had just heard. Mara found herself turning the words over in her mind again and again, trying to decide if she believed them, or if there was something more the alien was not telling them. Eventually, the corridor opened into a massive chamber, so large that Mara's breath caught in her throat at the sight of it. The ceiling stretched so high above them that it disappeared into a haze of soft light, and the walls curved outward in a wide circle, lined with rows upon rows of seats, occupied by dozens of different alien beings, representatives, Mara guessed, of the 17 species Vethrix had mentioned. At the center of the chamber stood a raised platform, and it was there that Vethrix led the small group of humans, leaving them standing alone beneath the watchful gaze of what looked like the entire assembly. A new voice spoke then, deep and resonant, coming from somewhere among the gathered representatives, though Mara could not immediately identify which of the many alien beings had spoken. Humans of the system you call Soul, you have crossed the threshold using power not your own, in defiance of judgment made and upheld for 60 of your years. Explain yourselves, or accept the consequences of your defiance. Mara stepped forward, her heart pounding, aware of every eye in the massive chamber fixed upon her. She thought of her father, of the burns he had carried for the rest of his life. She thought of every ship and crew that had tried before her and failed. She thought of every person back home on Earth, and Mars, and the Belt, still waiting, still hoping, still trapped behind a wall of light they had never asked for. "My name is Mara Voss," she began, her voice steady despite the fear coiled tight in her chest. "I am the captain of the ship that crossed your barrier. I did not come here to defy you for the sake of defiance. I came because my people have waited 60 years for an explanation, and all we ever received was silence, and a single message telling us we were not ready, without ever being told what readiness would actually look like." She paused, gathering her thoughts, aware that this might be the only chance she ever got to speak on behalf of her entire species. "You say you fear what we might become if given power too soon," she continued, "but consider what you have already seen. We built a ship using technology that was not our own, technology from a wrecked alien probe that drifted into our system by accident. We could have used that technology to build weapons, to threaten each other, to fight over its secrets. Instead, we used it to build a ship, and we sent that ship not to attack you, but to ask you a simple question. Why? Why do you keep us out? What must we do to prove ourselves?" The chamber remained silent, the assembled representatives watching without response, giving Mara nothing to read in their alien expressions. "You judged us 60 years ago," Mara went on. "But species change. People change. We are not the same as we were 60 years ago, and we will not be the same 60 years from now. If you truly want to protect us, and protect yourselves, from the mistakes of a species not ready for the stars, then give us the chance to prove what we've become, instead of judging us based on what we once were." Another long silence followed, stretching so long that Mara began to wonder if she had said too much, or not enough, or simply the wrong things entirely. "Your words carry weight, human, but words alone have never been sufficient proof, for your kind or any other. There exists, among our records, a final test, one offered only rarely, to species whose case merits further consideration. Do you understand the risk of accepting such a test, knowing failure may mean the permanent closure of the threshold to your entire species?" Mara felt her crewmates shift uneasily behind her, but she did not turn to look at them. She kept her eyes fixed on the assembled representatives, on the weight of the decision now resting entirely on her shoulders. "What is the test?" she asked. "A trial of both strength and restraint," the voice answered. "You will be given the chance to demonstrate the very qualities we seek in a species ready for the stars. Courage without recklessness, strength without cruelty, and wisdom enough to know the difference between the two. Should you succeed, the threshold will open, not just for your ship, but for your entire species. Should you fail? The voice trailed off, leaving the implication hanging heavy in the vast chamber. Mara turned then, finally, to look at her crew. Ren, pale but resolute. Amara, her eyes bright with a mixture of fear and fierce hope. Jonah, his jaw set in the same stubborn line it always took before a difficult mission. And Talia, meeting Mara's gaze with a small, determined nod. Mara turned back to face the assembly, drawing herself up to her full height, her voice ringing clear across the massive chamber. "We accept." A murmur passed through the gathered representatives, a sound like wind through leaves, though whether it carried approval or concern, Mara could not tell. The deep voice spoke once more, and this time, there was something almost like respect woven into its resonant tone. "Very well, humans of soul, prepare yourselves. The trial begins at the next rising of this station's light cycle. What you face next will determine not only your fate, but the fate of every human who comes after you." As Vethrix led the small crew back through the winding corridors toward their ship, Mara felt the enormous weight of what she had just agreed to settle over her shoulders, heavier than anything she had carried before. Somewhere ahead of them, in a place they had not yet seen, waited a trial designed to test the very best and worst of what humanity had to offer. She did not know yet what that trial would be, but she knew, with absolute certainty, that failure was not something she was willing to accept. The crew of the Reckoning spent what little time remained before the trial, preparing as best they could, though none of them knew exactly what they were preparing for. Vethrix had offered no details, only the vague promise that the trial would test courage, strength, and wisdom in equal measure. They gathered in the ship's small mess hall a few hours before the trial was set to begin, none of them able to sleep despite the late hour according to the station's light cycle. Ren sat hunched over a tablet, still trying to coax more power from the ship's damaged systems, though the weapons remained stubbornly locked no matter what he tried. Amara flipped through her notes on the assembly and its member species, searching for any clue about what the trial might involve. Jonah cleaned his sidearm out of habit, even though he knew it would likely be useless for whatever waited ahead. Talia sat quietly, staring at nothing in particular, her mind clearly somewhere else entirely. "Whatever this trial is," Mara said, breaking the tense silence, "we go into it together. No matter what they ask of us, we don't turn on each other, and we don't turn on our own principles, just to pass some test. If we're going to prove we're ready for the stars, we prove it by staying who we are, not by becoming something else." Her crew nodded, one by one, and though fear still hung heavy in the room, something like resolve settled over them as well. When the station's light cycle finally shifted, signaling the start of a new day, Vethrix arrived once more at the Reckoning. Zerlok, waiting silently, as the crew gathered themselves and stepped out to meet whatever came next. This time, Vethrix led them not to the massive assembly chamber, but to a smaller structure, attached to the station, one that hummed with a different kind of energy entirely, sharper and more focused than the soft, ambient glow of the rest of the facility. "This is a training and testing facility," Vethrix explained as they walked. "The trial you face will take place within a simulated environment, designed to test your responses under conditions that mirror real danger, without the true risk of permanent harm. Though I must warn you, the simulation carries genuine physical strain. It will not feel false to you, even knowing that it is." "What exactly are we going to face?" Amara asked. "That, I am not permitted to say," Vethrix replied. "Foreknowledge would compromise the trial's purpose. I can tell you only this. The scenario will present you with choices, not simply challenges of skill or strength. How you choose will matter, as much as how well you fight, perhaps more." They arrived at a wide chamber lined with strange equipment, and Vethrix directed each crew member to a separate pod, explaining that the simulation would connect their minds directly, allowing them to experience the trial as though it were entirely real. Mara hesitated at the entrance to her own pod, looking back at her crew one final time before the trial began. "Whatever happens in there," she said, "remember who we are. Remember why we came this far." One by one, the crew stepped into their pods, and the chamber dimmed around them as the simulation began. Mara opened her eyes to find herself standing on the bridge of the Reckoning. Though something about the ship felt subtly different, the air carrying a faint hum that had not been there before. Around her, her crew stood at their stations, looking as confused as she felt. "Is everyone all right?" she asked. "I think so," Ren said, checking his console, which now displayed readings from a star system none of them recognized. "According to this, we're patrolling near a colony world called Kest Prime. It's a member world of the Assembly, apparently under threat from something called the Devourer Swarm." Before anyone could ask further questions, an alarm blared across the bridge, and the viewport filled with a horrifying sight. A massive cloud of small, insect-like vessels, swarming toward a peaceful-looking planet in the distance, thousands upon thousands of them, moving with a terrible, coordinated purpose. "Report," Mara snapped, falling automatically into command mode despite the strangeness of the situation. "That's the Devourer Swarm," Amara said, her voice tight with recognition. "I read about them in the Assembly's historical records. They're not truly sentient, not in the way we understand it. They're closer to a hive of machines, consuming resources and expanding endlessly, destroying everything in their path. And they're headed straight for that colony," Talia said, watching the viewport with growing alarm. A new voice crackled through the ship's communication system, this one clearly not part of the Assembly, but rather a panicked transmission from the colony world itself. "This is Kest Prime Colonial Authority, requesting immediate assistance. We have limited defenses and no way to evacuate our population in time. Please, if anyone can hear this, we need help." Mara felt the weight of the moment settle over her immediately. This was the trial, she realized. Not a simple test of combat skill, but a genuine choice, forcing her crew to decide how to respond to a crisis with real consequences, even within the boundaries of a simulation. "Options," she said, turning to her crew. "The Reckoning isn't built for this kind of fight," Jonah said grimly, studying the weapons readouts. "We've got maybe enough firepower to take out a fraction of that swarm before we're overwhelmed ourselves. If we engage directly, we're not winning this fight." "What if we don't engage directly?" Ren said suddenly, an idea sparking behind his eyes. "The Devourer Swarm consumes resources, right? What if we could redirect them somehow, lure them away from the colony, instead of trying to destroy them outright?" "With what?" Talia asked. "Our power core," Ren said. "The alien phase drive puts out an energy signature unlike anything else in this system. If the swarm is drawn to resources, maybe we can use that signature as bait, draw them away from the colony and toward us instead. That would mean putting the Reckoning directly between the swarm and open space," Jonah said slowly, understanding the implication. "No cover, no support, just us, drawing an entire swarm's attention away from a planet full of people who can't defend themselves." "It's dangerous," Mara said. "It might not even work, and if it doesn't, we're sacrificing ourselves for nothing." "But if it does work," Amara said quietly, "we save an entire colony. Isn't that exactly the kind of choice they wanted to see from us? Courage without recklessness, strength without cruelty." Mara looked around at her crew, at the fear and determination mixed together on each of their faces, and she knew, without needing to ask, that every one of them was ready to make the same choice she was about to make. "Do it," she said. "Ren, reroute power to maximize our signature output. Talia, get us moving. Put us on an intercept course between the swarm and the colony. Jonah, keep our weapons ready, in case we need to fight our way out. Amara, keep monitoring the swarm's behavior. Tell us the moment anything changes." The crew sprang into action, the ship's engines roaring to life, as Talia guided the Reckoning directly into the path of the oncoming swarm. Ren worked feverishly at his console, boosting the power core's output far beyond its normal levels, sending out a beacon of energy so strong that it seemed to make the very air around the ship hum with power. For a tense, agonizing minute, nothing happened. The swarm continued its relentless approach toward the colony, showing no sign of noticing the small ship now standing directly in its path. Then, slowly, the leading edge of the swarm began to shift, drawn by the powerful energy signature pulsing from the Reckoning's core, redirecting its terrible momentum away from the colony and toward the lone human vessel instead. "It's working," Amara said, disbelief and hope mixing in her voice. "They're changing course, They're coming for us. Then let's give them a good chase, Talia said, gritting her teeth, as she pushed the ship's engines to their absolute limit, leading the massive swarm away from the colony and out toward open space. What followed was a desperate, harrowing flight. The reckoning. Weaving and dodging through open space with the entire Devourer swarm in pursuit, close enough at times that Jonah was forced to fire the ship's weapons in short bursts, clearing paths through the swarm's leading edges just to keep the ship from being overwhelmed entirely. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the crew pushing themselves and their ship to the very edge of their limits, drawing the swarm farther and farther from the colony they had sworn to protect, even as their own situation grew more desperate with every passing second. "Power core is overheating," Wren shouted, over the growing chaos on the bridge. "We can't keep this up much longer. If we don't shut down the signature soon, we're going to lose the core entirely." "How much farther until we're clear of the colony's defense perimeter?" Mara asked. "Almost there," Talia said, her hands white-knuckled on the controls. "Just a little more." The ship shuddered violently as a group of swarm vessels made it through Jonah's defensive fire, striking the third reckoning. Hull directly. Alarms blared across the bridge, and for a moment, Mara feared the trial, real or simulated, was about to end in failure. "Hull breach on Deck 3, Wren shouted. "We're losing atmosphere." "Emergency seals, now," Mara ordered, and Wren's hands flew across his console, managing to seal off the breach just before it could spread further through the ship. "Colony perimeter cleared," Talia called out finally, her voice tight with exhaustion and relief. "We're clear." "Wren, kill the signature. Now." Wren cut the power core's output immediately, and the massive swarm, no longer drawn by the powerful energy signature, began to lose cohesion, scattering in different directions now that its focus had been removed. The reckoning limped away from the dispersing swarm, battered and damaged, but intact, its crew battered but alive, having successfully drawn an entire deadly swarm away from an innocent colony, without ever having to destroy it entirely, and without sacrificing their own lives to do it. As the ship drifted in the aftermath, catching its breath, the simulated environment around them began to shimmer and fade, and Mara found herself opening her eyes back in the small testing chamber aboard the assembly station, her crew rising groggily from their own pods around her. Vethrix stood waiting nearby, its dark eyes studying the crew with an expression Mara still could not fully read. "The trial is complete," Vethrix said simply. "Did we pass?" Talia asked immediately, still catching her breath from the intensity of the simulation. Vethrix did not answer directly. Instead, it led them once more back to the massive assembly chamber, where the same gathered representatives waited, watching in silence as the small crew of humans walked once more to the center platform. The deep, resonant voice spoke again, filling the vast chamber. "We have observed your trial. You faced a choice between destruction and preservation, between easy victory through force and difficult victory through sacrifice and wisdom. You chose the harder path, the path that protected innocent life at great risk to your own. This is the quality we have sought, in species deemed ready for the stars." Mara felt her heart pounding as she waited for what came next, hardly daring to hope. "By the judgment of this assembly, the threshold shall open. Humanity, having demonstrated courage tempered by wisdom, strength tempered by restraint, is welcomed among the stars, on the condition of continued growth and continued demonstration of the qualities shown here today." A wave of disbelief and overwhelming relief crashed over Mara, so intense that she felt her knees nearly buckle beneath her. Beside her, she heard Amara let out a small, choked sound that was half laugh and half sob, and felt Talia's hand grip her shoulder tightly from behind. 60 years, Mara said quietly, mostly to herself, though the words carried clearly across the silent chamber. 60 years, and it's finally over. "Not over, human." The voice corrected gently. "Beginning. What your species does with the stars now open to you will determine everything that follows. We will be watching, not as jailers any longer, but as neighbors, hopeful that the wisdom you showed today will guide you as you grow." The journey back to the reckoning. And the journey home through the now open barrier passed in a blur for Mara, her mind still struggling to fully comprehend what her small crew had accomplished. As their ship finally crossed back through the shimmering wall of light, this time without resistance, without the crushing pulse that had once turned back every human vessel, Mara felt tears she had not expected gathering in her eyes. Behind them, the barrier remained, no longer a wall to keep humanity contained, but a gateway now open for any human ship brave enough to cross it. Ahead of them, Earth and Mars and the Belt waited, unaware of just how much their future had changed in the span of a few short days. Mara Voss sat back in her captain's chair, watching the familiar stars of her own solar system come back into view, and thought of her father, of the scars he had carried for a mission that had failed so long ago. She thought of everyone who had tried before her, and everyone who would come after. 60 years of a closed door had finally ended, not through brute force, not through weapons or conquest, but through courage, wisdom, and the simple, stubborn refusal of 5 people to turn back when everyone else had told them it was impossible. The stars, at last, belonged to humanity too. And somewhere far behind them, past the now open barrier, an entire galaxy of civilizations began to prepare themselves for the arrival of a new neighbor, one who had proven, in the hardest way possible, that they were finally, truly ready.